Welcome to the EarthWorks podcast, where our team will share the jargon of carbon from many of our turf friends from the past 30 years.
Hi, everybody. I'm Joel Simmons, and this is another EarthWorks podcast. And today we have back with us perhaps one of our favorite podcasters, our chemist, our friend, Mr. Lawrence Mayhew. Lawrence, I've told you this a couple of times, but you have become the star of the podcast series. We actually have had people come to us saying, "Is Lawrence here? I'd like to meet Lawrence. I hear him on the podcast all the time." And I was just up in Canada a week ago, or last week actually, and I had a bunch of people come up to me. Says, "Yeah, I've been hearing your podcast. I especially like the ones with Lawrence Mayhew. Those are very good. He's funny." I said, "Well, he's not really all that funny, but he's very informative." And we're going to be informed today as well. We like having you back on at least quarterly, if not even more often, because it gives us something to look forward to. It gives us something to really get excited about. And there's always questions that are happening. And this is the busiest time of year for us. So it's always, a lot of stuff going on, a lot of questions. We've done about, I think we've done about 30 soils academies, which is my, the 3-hour soils class. And I, of course, incorporate a lot of your expertise. One of the things that I get a lot of feedback on is that I'm not allowed to say humic acids anymore. I have to say humic substances because Lawrence told us that they're not acids. So let's clear up some of the area. Lots of things to talk about, and I do want to talk. We're going to reiterate some of the things that we've done. And if you haven't listened to Lawrence's podcast before, there's a number of them now, and I encourage everybody to go back into the archives. We've had over 200 podcasts now, Lawrence. I don't know if you were aware of that. We hit our 200th a couple of weeks ago. But the ones that are really the strongest, I think, are the ones that we did, the original ones where we talked about humic acid. So we're going to reiterate some of that because for those of you who don't know Lawrence, he is generally recognized as a world-renowned expert on humic substances, not humic acids, because technically, according to our chemist friend here, they're not an acid. And we'll let him explain that in a second. And he's been working with us and helping us to formulate and stabilize and do everything in our stuff. So let me start this by saying, and I always love this. I heard somebody saying the other day, one of our renowned experts, consultants in this area. Well, I don't know why anybody's talking about all these humate stuff. There's plenty of humic acids in the soil. So what do you say to that? I mean, how do you respond to something like that? Is there any humic acid naturally occurring in the soils? Give us the rundown.
Where was he, in Iowa? On that
Oh, Pennsylvania, of all places.
Oh, not that 18-inch thick.
Right.
Black.
Well, we got real soils.
Black gumbo soil. Yeah, there's a lot of humic materials in there. That's why they're dark.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody who makes that kind of comment is kind of asking for trouble, because humic acids are operationally defined. That means that there are substances in soils that can be extracted, but you define them based upon the extraction method you use. So what are these things really?
Yes, good question.
Yeah. So when you're talking about humic acids, you're really talking about the chemistry of extraction of a dark material. Right. And we assume these materials have gone through a process of humification, which means at one time they look like something that was familiar to us, let's say like an apple or an orange, and then they're in soils for so long that we don't recognize them anymore, like poop. Right. Very good. I mean, when you think about it, you have recognizable things going in your body, and what comes out the other end is unrecognizable. Well, that's kind of the definition of humification. Something went into these soils, was there for a very long period of time, changed into very dark, stable substances. They contribute to the CEC of the soil. They contribute to the bioavailability of nutrients for plants and microbes, and they stabilize carbon. They are the most stable form of carbon in soils. So it's because they went through a long process of combining and recombining and ending up like a material that looks just like dark soil. So the darkness of dark soils are caused by humic substances.
So
That's really what they
are these comments coming to us because people look at a soil and they see humus and they assume that that's humic acid? I mean, is that I'm trying
Oh,
to
yeah.
I'm trying to
Yeah,
give
that
it
happens.
whoever the
That,
benefits of the doubt here because I don't want to assume.
that happens a lot
Yeah.
because way back when in the regulations, the fertilizer regulations, they said that humic acids were derived from humus. That
Right.
was the original definition way back. And some people put that on their label 50 years ago and it's still there.
Yeah,
So,
there's still labels in the turf industry that say humic acid derived from humus. How long ago was that in vogue? I mean, you're saying a
well,
long way back. I mean, you're talking 50 years?
I've been working with with APCO, and I actually sit on an APCO committee, and I've been doing that for 30 years. And I think that's right
Okay.
about when that definition
Yeah.
disappeared, right about when I came along, because we looked at that definition. The Humic Products Trade Association looked at that definition, said, we got to get that changed at APCO. That's the regulatory group in the United States for regulating fertilizers. And APCO did change that definition to something that makes a little more sense. But it just simply says it's the humidified materials that are extracted with alkaline material and then acidified. That's it. That's the
That's the current
definition.
definition of a humic substance from
Yeah.
according to AFCO.
If it's acidified to pH of 1 with hydrochloric acid,
I
that
remember you
becomes
saying that.
critical if we're going to be commenting about the state of California and what they think are humic acids. So, yeah.
Well, let's hold off on California because I want to
Yeah,
talk
I know,
to you.
but that's critical. That's critical.
It is
'cause
critical. Yeah.
That's in the current regulation, pH of 1. Okay, so I'll just leave it at that.
I've been using the word humification a lot in my talks, and I want to have you kind of define that. So let me just set the table for you. I mean, I look at and that we're dealing with very often sand-based soil systems that
Mhm.
are not humified at all naturally. I mean, there's just basically sand. Maybe they put in some peat moss, but and then we start to grow. And we start to grow roots, and the roots start to digest, and we're trying to establish this concept of humification. And the way I've been describing it, and I want you to correct me if I'm not quite right here. And I probably should have asked you this before I started all of this. But the humification process is the digestion of more lignous material. And we've seen pictures of very humified soils. And it's interesting because I'll spend time in my classes, oftentimes with golf course superintendents, and I'll show a picture of a root zone that might have 4 or 5 inches of very humified soil. So it's humus. It's not lignous. It's not thatch. It's been humified. It's taken a number of years of biological activity to break it down, but it's humus. So we're calling this humification, and the digestion of that lignous material is the humification process, and it started by feeding microbes. Is that a fair working definition of humification?
Pretty incomplete, actually.
Thank you very much. I would expect nothing less. I just want to get the ball rolling. Well, give me the complete one. Let's talk about the
Well,
process of
you said
humification.
lignous. You said lignous material, lignin. Yeah, that's only one of many components
Right.
that go through the humification process. First of all, let's give you a little background. There's probably 50 definitions for what humification process
No,
is.
that's certainly not confusing, is it?
You're free to do your own.
So I can be 51. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, nobody's going to correct you.
Obviously, at least 50 people won't. Anyway, go ahead.
You may know that I developed a method to determine whether or not a material is humified or not humified. I developed methods published in the Journal of AOAC.
I'm not sure I did know that, to be honest. I've known you for how many years? And I work with you on a regular basis. That's funny.
Like, what is
time for
this
me to
stuff?
check out.
I thought the title of the
hell
paper.
is this crap you're talking about?
Yeah,
Anyway,
I thought the title of my paper should have been, "What is this stuff?" Anyway,
what is this dark stuff in the
if
ground?
we have a dark material such as molasses
Yeah.
or lignosulfonate,
Oh, the
yeah,
fake
what do we
humic.
have? Is that humified? So you run that through the test that we developed, and it'll say no, it's not humified.
Right.
So
I would
I'll
assume.
save you all
Yeah.
the details, all the technology that went into it, but it's a simple sniff test for regulators. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. So then you move on, but it's only intended for ingredients that go into the manufacturing process. So if you took a lignite coal, for example, where there's a lot of confusion about that, and you run it through the test, it'll say no, it's not humified, because the humification process involves one more step. Okay, you said the digestion. That's a good start. But after digestion in natural systems, these digested materials, which are relatively simple materials now, because they used to be proteins, now they're amino acids, they recombine with each other in such a way that they become so complex that nobody really knows what they are.
There's
We can
something
describe them
mysterious.
operationally. We can say, oh, we can extract them with alkaline, but we don't really have a good description of these materials. We know they exist. We know they contribute to high CEC values. We know that they detoxify toxins in systems. We know a lot about them, and we got a lot of faith in them working, but the science is very much ongoing as to what they have no structure. They have no particular structure. They're very heterogeneous, which means they got a lot of stuff mixed up in them. And these are dark materials. But there is a test to determine whether or not they're humified or not. And that involved a lot of research into what those definitions are. Yours is number 51.
Thank goodness.
Okay. There are a lot of definitions out there, tremendous number of definitions, but only one standardized method to determine whether they are indeed humified.
So in your mind, give me your working definition of, the humification process, of what humification means, just so people understand when we use the term, even if I am number 51, what are we really trying to get at here? I mean, help people understand that.
In my opinion, it's a biogeochemical process that happens over long lengths of time. And it's a lot of materials that are co-mingling with each other, particularly in soil systems. And when they commingle with each other, they come out as like super molecules. They're huge. They're not true molecules. They're just a very, very, very complex material, has an extremely high CEC value, which means it's excellent for putting on soils and increasing nutritive exchanges and increasing biological activity. They're made by microbes, particularly. Microbes are involved in this. That was the bio part of that definition.
One of the, I show a picture in my slide set often of a profile of a golf course green. And I show other pictures of profiles of golf course greens that are layered out in thatch, where, somebody had put down a lot of nitrogen, built a nice thick layer of lignous thatch, which has not been digested. And then they top dress it. And there's a picture that I have that many folks that have listening have seen that I call the thatch cake. And it looks like a cake layered out, with a nice piece of white, icing in the middle, which is the sand from the top dressing, and this nice piece of dark material, which looks like a piece of chocolate. So it just layers out. And I see this often when I pull profiles of golf course greens where they just haven't digested this lignous material. And then I go to other folks that have been working in biological soil management practices and have been applying, materials to feed carbon to microbes. And you see that material now breaking out, and you can feel the difference. You can feel the difference between that cake, that layered thatchy material. When you run that through your fingers, it's stemmy and sticky. And then the other material that has been digested feels like a nice piece of chocolate cake just crumbles in your hand. I mean, it's physically different when you feel it. And it's funny because I show this picture a lot to classes and ask superintendents, would you like this? And it's about a 4 or 5 inch profile of humus. And most people will say, no, we don't like that, because the industry has been taught that, that kind of level of organic matter is bad because it's going to create all sorts of physical problems. But when I look at these profiles and I look at these humified or these digested profiles, water moves through them as fast as anything. They're very firm from a playing standpoint. They're very playable. They're very again, they're very firm. But you know, it's a definitive difference, and you can see it happening. You can actually see it starting to continue to migrate its way down into the soil because there's a lot of microbial activity, and as we know, a lot of the humus in the soil is this dead microbial population. So that's kind of my working definition. At least that's my observation. And again, it's anecdotal perhaps, but it's consistent. You know.
You're right, and everybody else is wrong.
I've been asking you to say that for years. You must have gotten my check. Thank goodness.
Yeah, thanks for the
Yeah, exactly. That's very funny.
No, I totally agree with what you just said, because you are going to see better penetration of water in systems that high organic matter has been built up, because that organic matter is only a sign as to what's really going on. And that sign says the microbial activity here is active. It's actively putting things through a process that is favorable to growing things, to life, favorable to life. So that means a lot of things are better balanced. The thermodynamics are incredibly complex in these systems, but humic substances are renowned for reducing what's called entropy. They try to reduce the crazy runaway energy systems that are there and try to bring them together into something that's more balanced and effective and efficient. You know, it's just a natural system designed by nature, and it works very, very, very well. And you've seen it work. I've seen it work. Agriculture is heading that way finally.
Clearly, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Trying to build carbon. Yeah. Trying to build carbon. You got to build humic substances in soil. You have to. It's a slow process.
Yes, it is.
It doesn't happen overnight.
No, and that's a tough thing. You know, I mean, you know, at the end of the day, you know, everybody in this industry is a salesperson. They're selling something. And, you know, it's always fun when you walk into somebody's office and say, hey, we can fix all your problems in 3 or 4 years. It's, you know, basically it's the last conversation you can often have with somebody. It's like, really, get the hell out of here. I need to fix this now. Let me ask you this. There's another thing I've been playing with in my conversations and certainly in my meetings. You know, one of the, you know, I ran a couple 2-minute turf talks, and we've been running this in our slide set, calling the, you know, we call it the carbon myths. And one of the more prevalent myths that I've been battling since really that we started this company was, you know, we hear this from academias a lot. It's like, oh, there's plenty of carbon in the soil. You don't have to worry about carbon. Why are you putting down carbon? You know, there's plenty of carbon in the soil. And, you know, and of course that's true. There probably is plenty of carbon. The question is it something that a microbe can actually utilize effectively? And you know, I thought about this, and you know, the predominant species, at least in turf, and I think you would agree with me here, is the bacteria. And they may only live for what? I mean, you're going to correct me on this one, but I say they only live for 20 minutes. I also say there's only I also say there's only 5% of the biome actually you know, quantified, and you say it's 2%, and qualify that. But so if you have a 20-minute microbe, and I'll call them that, the 20-minute microbes, you know, and they don't, you know, and they got to try to digest in that 20 minutes that they got on this planet. And they're trying to digest a really long chain lignous root system. I mean, isn't that the whole foundation of humification and biological soil management? We're trying to provide, the big difference here is that we're really talking about available forms of carbon as opposed to, you know, all the forms of carbon, most of which, certainly in the turf environment, is not really, you know, going to be digested by that microbe that's got 20 minutes on this planet. So what do you say about that?
What you need to break down lignin, which is very stable, called recalcitrant carbon, which you need are fungal. You need fungal activity to break down the lignin portion. So that means you got something in your soil out there, the bacteria can't touch.
Right.
So something else has to come along and break that down. It's fungi. Okay, so what we need for a very effective system is to mimic nature. We need a balance of bacteria and fungi. And that's starting to be well defined through DNA, that sort of thing, DNA analysis of what's
well, we did that years ago, even working with Dr. Ingram at Oregon State. You know, Elaine Ingham was, you know, starting the soil food web, and we measured
Yeah.
And it was really, we were all, and of course, this was in compost tea, but the point was the same. I mean, we're trying to keep a good balance between fungal
Right.
and bacterial growth, which is really, again, I mean, any good soil will do that, even
And
actinomycetes.
actinomycetes, for
Right,
example, bridge the gap.
right.
They look like a bacteria, act like a bacteria, but they're also like a fungus. They act like a fungus. So they actually fit right in the middle there. Humic substances can provide the atmosphere, what do you want to call it? The conditions for more balanced bacterial and fungal
Explain
combination.
that. How and why?
Yeah, why? I don't know.
How about how? Can you give me that one?
I have seen this so many times. I'll give you a real good example. Okay, my friend Gary Zimmer was living in a condo complex where they were spraying who knows what out on the lawn. And he had a condo meeting one night and he said, I object to the use of pesticides on our lawn. Your kids are out there walking in it. We have to, we want to go out there and sit in a lawn chair and I don't want to go through that exposure. And they said, okay, you take over the maintenance then. So he did. He took some of his products, which all contained humic materials in them, and he used that carbon-based fertilization program versus NP and K that was being put on all those years and pesticides. And guess what popped up in that beautiful lawn in front of all these condo owners? Mushrooms.
Ooh, fungal.
Yeah. He actually created conditions where fungal growth increased, and then they were really mad at him.
Because they had all these mushrooms.
But it was a dramatic demonstration of how these humic materials can come in and rebalance this bacterial fungal balance. The bacteria were way in the majority before he came along and put on a humic based material. And then that balance naturally kicked in under those conditions.
And we're not trying to tell anybody, but by using these products, all you're going to grow is mushrooms. But let's
No,
let's
no.
continue. But no, that's fascinating. I mean, you think about it. Exactly what you were saying is, we do need to keep this balance between fungal, and that's all in creating the environment. That's all about making sure that there's an ample food source there, and there's oxygen and water moving through the profile, and we've created the environment. So that's important, and we can see all of that growth. And I mean, we've had this conversation on this podcast with you. Maybe in our lifetimes we'll have better qualification of how that we can test this and quantify the number of bugs. I mean, you'd started to mention DNA testing, which I think has some skepticism to it. And one of the things that I've heard that makes sense is that DNA could have been in that soil for thousands of years and it would still test through because it's just, it's just kind of there. But there are definitely things that are starting to happen in our industry that are allowing us to identify and quantify, the biological population. But yeah, you're right. I mean, so if a bacteria is 20 minutes, what's the life expectancy of a fungal growth in the soil? And how long are they going to survive?
I never thought about that.
It's probably longer than bacteria,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
So yeah, I mean,
that
yeah.
part's correct. By how much, I don't know. I've never seen it actually quantified, but that's a great question.
Is 20-minute bacteria fair? I mean, is that a fair statement? Is that
Yeah,
about
it
the average?
is. But in that time, they need to reproduce a lot. So
Yeah, so they're
that's
busy.
how they do it.
They're busy doing that, and they're
They're
trying to
busy.
eat. I mean, what a
Man, they're
busy life
busy.
for 20 minutes, man. That's a heck of a
Yeah.
crazy time.
What
What a
would you do if
party.
you had 20 minutes?
Yeah, well, I guess there's a good point. Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
hadn't thought of it quite that way either. We're coming up with some great questions here, not any necessarily good answers, but yeah. But I mean, my point of the 20-minute bacteria, though, one of the things that Elaine Ingham taught us that I will always remember is that the predominant species in turf, in grass, and again, think of it from a botanical hierarchy level. Grass is on the bottom of the scale, a botanical scale. I mean, it's a simple plant. And microbes are the bacteria are the predominant species. And if they only got 20 minutes to do their thing, that's why it's so important that we provide these, available forms, digested forms of material, the things that we're using, like composted materials or kelp meal or fish meal or even some of the sugars. All of these add to the ability for these little guys to reproduce aggressively because they have ample amount of food that they can get now, as opposed to trying to chew, as I like to use the analogy, chewing on a pencil to get energy. We might be able to get carbon out of that pencil, but if I only got 20 minutes, I got other plans. I got to go,
Yeah,
do
and
my thing in those 20 minutes, and
if you
I
go
need
back
food
to the
now.
if you go back to the comment, there's plenty of carbon in the soils. It begs the question of what form is that
That's the
carbon?
question.
Yeah.
That's the correct question, is what form is the carbon, and is it digestible enough for these microbes to really do their job? And I think I think it kind of draws a picture, which is kind of nice. So the whole point of putting down these carbon materials that are just, and I think I've shared this with you again recently. I mean, every day we find a new manufacturing company that's using some level of carbon. I'll talk to a group of 100 superintendents, and I think I can say very comfortably that there's not a superintendent in the room that doesn't have something in their shop that has some level of carbon in it. It might be a humate, it might be molasses, it might be a kelp meal in a product, because somebody is manufacturing with these carbon-based materials, because the industry is starting to understand, yeah, that biology actually does have a play here, and that these available forms of carbon. And again, and I think we should qualify this: humic acids, humates, are not a food source for microbiology, but they are structural, they're architectural. I mean, qualify that for us so that we understand that a little bit better.
Well, I mentioned it earlier that they provide the conditions for biological activity to go forward and try to utilize energy properly. And that it's like a house. You live in the house because it provides the conditions for our not only our survival, but our comfort, and we can store food here, we can get rid of excrement here. There's a lot of functions to a house. The last thing you do is eat it.
Right. Unless you're really hungry, but that wouldn't be very effective, would it? It would take a
No,
while, wouldn't it? You probably wouldn't
no,
get any energy out of it.
there's not much nutritional value in that plaster over my head,
Right, exactly.
but I don't want to destroy it in the process. I don't want to do anything in here that'll destroy it. I don't want to flood it with water. I don't want to start a fire in here. So the conditions are
Because you
there.
wouldn't survive. You wouldn't survive in
Right.
the elements, and
So,
you would be devoured by the saber-toothed tiger that would come through your walls and eat you.
and if my house were made out of humic substances and some giant came along and poured urea on it, it would melt my house.
Yeah.
Humic substances are soluble in urea. So there's some things you got to be very careful
Oh, that's
about
interesting.
how to treat these materials.
Yeah. Let me ask you a couple things. One of the things that came up the other day is that I remember this when Jerry and I started EarthWorks back in the early 90s. One of the great criticisms we got for building some of these composted materials was, oh, these things are loaded with ash. And I'm sitting there thinking, I don't understand what that means. I mean, what do you mean they're loaded with ash and they're going to clog pore space? And then I finally actually talked to a professor at Cornell, and he said that, first of all, there's more ash floating in from the atmosphere to a golf green than there would be from applying it with your fertilizer. But the ash is the mineral content. And, one of the things that, you and I both learned very well from Jerry Bernetti was that the mineralization is really one of the most important things. So when you have a composted material, like, again, I'll use our egg layer waste material. They feed these birds with a ton of mineral, and most of that goes through the back end. I mean, they take in very little of it. So the mineral that we have is very rich in these raw materials. And again, I'm listening to this conversation. This goes back a long time, but it comes up every once in a while that these materials are full of ash. And I'm like, yeah, that's the whole point. We're trying to remineralize. And, again, I think that was one of the strongest lessons that I learned from our friend, Mr. Bernetti. And it's still a conversation in this
Well,
weird.
that's a good example of an operational definition.
There you go again.
It is. It
Yeah,
is
I like it.
operationally defined. What is ash? Ash is what's left over after you put a substance in a furnace at 550 degrees centigrade for X number of minutes.
Right.
That's operationally defining what ash is. There's not ash there, but if you ash verb, if you ash
Right.
something, now you have ashes left over, and they're, like you said, they're primarily mineral, almost
Yeah.
entirely mineral.
And, especially in, I mean, in a crop like turf, or nowadays more cover crops are happening in agriculture, but any cover crop is going to constantly demineralize the soil and find that mineral, dissolve it because it needs it, whatever it might be, and it'll be able to bring it into the plant. And the whole point of remineralization is to provide these forever nutrients, or sustainable nutrients anyway, so that when the plant does in fact need it, it can spit out its organic acids and dissolve some of these minerals and find the phosphorus or the iron or whatever it might need, it's going to find in the soil, like, Mother Nature kind of taught them to do, right?
Yeah, interesting you used the word remineralization, because that came right out of the sustainable agricultural movement of the 1980s, late 70s, early 1980s.
I stole it from Jerry, but yeah, I know.
Yeah. And what was the first mineral they tried to increase in soil systems to increase the bioavailability and increase the efficiency of inputs? Do you know which mineral that was?
I would hate to say nitrogen, but
It was no, it definitely
thank
was.
God.
The number one mineral that they wanted to increase, and the university system said, no, there's plenty of it out there. You don't need any more. Sound familiar?
Yes.
Going back to the 1980s, poo-pooed it. University system poo-pooed this whole regenerative movement based on one element that went forward from that day forward and turned out to be an incredibly effective and profitable industry. You haven't figured it out yet, have you?
Well, there could be many, but I feared to take a guess.
Calcium.
I was going to say, I was just going to say calcium.
Calcium.
Yeah, because that's just a Rolade for pH.
No.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
no,
that's what academia likes to
no.
think, is that
Oh,
it's
no, that has nothing to do with pH. Absolutely nothing to do with pH. pH is based upon the acid alkaline balance in a solution. pH is defined as the hydrogen concentration in a water solution. In the perfect pure water solution, you can calculate pH, which is the negative logarithm of the hydrogen ion concentration. But that's as far as it goes. If you take a soil solution and you put a probe in it and you tell your customer that your soil or your product has a pH of, make up any number you want to, that is measuring the hydrogen ion activity. It's not measuring the hydrogen ion concentration. Very, very misleading.
What's the difference between the activity and the concentration?
Huge difference. If you have calcium present, for example, in a soil solution, that calcium is going to kind of fight for its space, and size counts in soil solution. Yeah. Yes. If you're a magnesium, good luck. If there's a calcium anywhere nearby in that exchange system,
you get beat over the head,
because that's the big one in the room. Yeah. Calcium with its positive charge and its hydrated ion radius is a very, very effective bully, if you will, and it antagonizes almost everything around it. So you got to be very careful how much is in that solution. There is a balance for that concentration, but that would impact a reading of hydrogen ion concentration, because they're both cations and they're both competing for space in this solution.
I mean, I use the musical chairs analogy, where there's 50 chairs at a table, and and hopefully, or 100 chairs at the table, and 68 of them are calcium. But if there's more, then there's not room for some other folks to be sitting there, like the 98-pound weakling hydrogen.
Well, biological agriculture promoted this idea of concentration balance. You want so much saturation percentage on the colloids of calcium, want so much of magnesium, so much of potassium. And again, the university systems just try to destroy that.
Still do. I mean, that's the basic Albrecht model of base saturation, and it's
the model of base saturation. And there's a lot of successful farms around here in Wisconsin that look at that concentration and they try to balance based on those concentration numbers. And then you don't want things to get out of balance. You don't want too much magnesium. You don't want too much potassium. They're all in a balanced system. So trying to understand that balance is the challenge. And
And
what,
you know, and what you're describing, and this is where I think a lot of the confusion has always been, is that the academia looks at calcium solely as a nutrient to the plant. Whereas, and you just described this in the way you presented this, what we're really suggesting here is that that balance between calcium and magnesium and all the cations is about physics. It's really about creating a physical environment where air and water can move through, and now we're setting the stage for biology. But that's where the frustration has always lied, is that in heavier soils, and we know that in the golf course world we've got a lot of light sandy low CECs. The balancing doesn't work there. We understand that. We don't follow that model. But in the heavier soils, what we see, what we have experienced over and over and over again for the last 35 years is by getting the soils working and balanced, and calcium is a big part of that, obviously 68% of it, we change the physical environment. So it goes back to that three-legged stool, where chemistry can affect physics and sets the stage for biology, but the calcium becomes the player physically, not just nutritionally. And I don't understand that whole argument, because again, we have so many combatants that are stuck in the plant box, whereas I think what you're finding in sustainable agriculture is really they're starting to understand that it is a physical and biological environment as much as anything. And I mean, and again, this is really what Jerry taught me. I remember vividly walking fields with him when I first started working with Jerry, and he could identify, or had somebody there to identify, certain weed species based on soil chemistry. And we could definitely, you walk on a muddy field in Pennsylvania, you got mud stuck to your boots because we got so much magnesium in our soils, and we can bring calcium into that environment and push some of that away and flocculate the soils and allow for better air movement. So, that's always been my biggest battle for all these years, is that we're talking about this as a physical entity, not just simply as a nutritional entity, because it's providing, physical support. That's it.
we're done here.
Okay. Oh, I'm assuming. All
We
right.
just
All right.
solved the world's problem right there.
Let me I love that. That's just leave me hanging. I'm good with that. But it makes sense. And I know you understand. I know you subscribe to that, so I'll leave it at that.
No, I don't have anything to add to that.
Let's
I was just thinking, it just took me back to a field walk. I've seen this so many times. You go on a field walk on an open pasture system, and the farmer will say, well, why aren't my cows eating the clover?
Yeah.
Well, clover just happens to be a calcium accumulator.
Yes.
And if they're not really addressing bioavailable calcium inputs, then you just pick the clover and put it in your own mouth and chew it, and you'll find out why the cows aren't eating it. They're not bringing enough sugars into that leaf, and it's really bitter.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a calcium effect right there in itself. But that's a demonstration of lack of bioavailable calcium. Yeah, if you extracted calcium out of that soil, you would find it. But if you ran a different kind of test on it and tried to pull the available calcium out of that soil using a very mild test, you'll get a number that says you need more, and you need it in different form.
Right.
Yeah.
You need, when you say different form, explain that.
Well, what if you had a calcium acetate, for example, as an input?
Okay.
What if you had I don't like calcium nitrate especially, but if you want to increase the bioavailability of calcium in the soil, there's numerous materials to use. These precipitated calciums, for example, precipitated calcium carbonate that come out of the sugar industry, those are particularly effective, not because they're soluble, but because of their structure, their physics. Right. Their structure is such that microbes actually recognize them and they can interact with them. But you throw something on like limestone, which is a ground up rock, that's a horrible source of calcium. I mean, it'll release under acid conditions only.
Yeah.
Biological activity doesn't necessarily bother with it because it's a rock. So that's what I mean by the different form. It depends on
we've been getting a lot of calcium out of the bird, and it's been digested. So it's gone through their gut and then it's
Mhm.
been digested, and we're finding that to be extremely available too.
Yeah, it's no longer calcium
It's no
carbonate.
longer carbonates,
Yeah,
right?
right.
It's been
It's
digested
something
by the
else.
bird, and then it goes into a composting process for 6 or 7 months or a year, and it gets even,
Uh-huh.
it's because it's already been digested once. It
Now it can react with acetates, formates, all sorts of
everything
uh,
that's in that
yeah,
material,
yeah,
and now we've got a really balanced calcium. I mean, that's really the trick on calcium, which is kind of funny. It's
yeah.
funny, we've been talking about calcium, for forever. Tell me that story again. You said in the 80s they shut down the whole momentum because of calcium. What was just because they were saying there was plenty
They
of
didn't.
calcium?
They never succeeded in shutting that movement down
No, they
because
haven't, and it's gotten
because
stronger than ever.
because consultants went on farms and they said, we're going to increase your calcium saturation because it's too low. And in Wisconsin, we sit on dolomitic limestone, which means there's a lot of magnesium here.
Right.
So that gets, and then these smart university agronomists told them, "Oh, just go down to your local quarry when you want to adjust lime for pH." That
And
just raised the magnesium levels even higher.
and
It
put the
got
same thing on that you already have too much of.
so you now you
Because
got concrete instead of soils.
right.
Yeah, so this movement came along and said we can rebalance that system by adding forms of calcium, and it worked. It worked. It
Yeah.
saved people's lives, their livelihood. So no, you're not going to fight that.
What happens in the soil when we put down? You got a high mag soil. You put down a gypsum or a limestone or something like that, and you're actually flocculating the soil. What's the chemistry there? What actually happens to the magnesium? Does it just get blocked? Does it get pushed out? What's the
Yeah,
actual?
it gets out competed by the calcium physically, and calcium gradient, it's called high ionic radius, and there's a relationship between that and the charge that's on there, and it ends up that calcium magnesium are pretty close at competing for each other, except magnesium loses out based on size.
Yeah, yeah, right. I mean, it's all a competition, right?
Yeah, it's a competition. So you're adding calcium to a high magnesium soil, trying to outcompete the magnesium, try to rebalance the system. And at that point, it's no longer a chemistry thing. It's no longer a physical thing. At that point, the whole system realizes that there's less competition for the calcium because you just increase the calcium. Now that becomes part of so many enzymatic processes
Right.
and biological processes that the biology increases. See, it's not a chemistry thing at that point. The increases, and then all these other interactions that are really complex start happening. You see carbon build up, you see all sorts of things happen that are really good.
Interesting.
It's interesting too. There's a new way of measuring nitrogen. Did you want to talk about that?
Yeah, let's talk about that, and then I want to finish up with my friends in California. So you had told me a
Okay.
little bit about this ACE process, the
Yeah.
autoclaved citrate extractable. Tell me more
Yes.
about that. It's the first time you and I have talked about it, so it's all new to me, and I'm fascinating.
One of the challenges of regenerative agriculture is that there aren't too many tests out there that you can apply that say, oh yeah, your soil is becoming healthier. So,
Yes, that's a big
because
challenge, and we
yeah,
want to find something that does help us quantify this.
this new laboratory technique seems to correlate very, very well with the total amount of nitrogen that's in a soil. It correlates somewhat to ammonium that's in the soil. Totally does not have anything to do with nitrates in the soil, but and it also correlates to crop yields. So we got something here. Yeah, we got something that now looks like a tool, and it's called autoclavable citrate extractable nitrogen. So which is operationally defined nitrogen again. And it's a laboratory method, but it correlates very well with the parameters that people have put in place for what they call sustainable or healthier soils. So it seems to be working quite well. It's only in the research stages right now, but I find it very encouraging that that's
This is
happening.
being done at Michigan State. Is that where the
Yeah,
work is being
yeah,
done?
in Michigan. Yes.
And who's doing it? Do we know? I mean, what department? Is it a specific?
Let me see.
You just happen to have the paper right there.
The
Why we have
Catherine,
chemists on our
yeah,
podcast.
Catherine Nasco was the lead author on this paper, and she's with the Kellogg Biological Station in Hickory Corners, Michigan.
Interesting.
She was the head writer on this, the lead, and it's very, very encouraging. So,
What's the actual process? I mean, it sounds like
well,
obviously.
autoclaving, you know what an autoclave
Yeah,
is?
I do. Yeah,
Yeah,
explain it because not everybody does.
they put the soil in an autoclave first. So under pressure, high
Right.
pressure and high temperature, they're actually changing the physical characteristics of that soil. Then they take it and extract it with a citrate. I don't know if it's ammonium citrate. I didn't pay any attention to that part, but it's a citrate soluble nitrogen. So it's just operationally defined as how to pull nitrogen out of a soil sample. And then they found out that it correlated very, very well with all these parameters. So very, very encouraging. I'm excited about it
So
because
is this leading to what we were talking about earlier, where maybe in our lifetime we can start to quantify some of these
yes,
processes?
because if you try to quantify nitrates, it's a crazy variable over seasons and time and weather. So that's been thrown out years ago. If you
Yeah.
try to use ammonium as a parameter, it too goes through seasonal changes, moisture impacts. It's so many things impact it. Along comes this ACE nitrogen method, and it's not impacted by these things. You
Hmm.
know,
So
I
there's
say,
no
oh, there's more in July than there was in May or something, but it's not
right.
being impacted, and the correlations are very, very well. Looked at the R squared values, they all made sense. The P values made sense. Everything makes sense about this new technique. So I think it has a place in our future.
So obviously at this point nobody's commercially practicing
I
this
don't think
this
so.
procedure, but again, how this is very recent, I understand.
Right. And one thing it's going to tell anybody is that you got more nitrogen out there than you realized.
Then yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You're familiar with the ENR practice, and estimated nitrogen release in the soil, and how they do that? I mean, it's half. I mean, it doesn't really do much of it. ENR is basically directly related to the. It's a mathematical equation directly related to the organic matter in the soil, and it does not necessarily quantify how much nitrogen you have. Even Logan Labs continues. You know, they have that. You know, that tool that they can measure this, and I see it on some soil tests, but I don't understand why. And it was really done for farmers growing corn that were trying to determine how much nitrogen to put on their fields to get a reasonable crop release from that. But you know, it sounds like ACE is much more thorough, and definitely bringing into the picture some biology, or at least
Yeah,
a bigger picture.
it reflects what the biology builds up in the soil. It's a direct
Wow.
reflection. It's a direct measurement of what, you know,
Yeah.
90% of the nitrogen in soil is biologically derived and
Right.
hooked to carbon. So this test measures that portion right there.
Interesting. You
Yeah.
know, it's funny, and I want to get to this other humate question before we end up, but you know, I again was at a couple meetings recently, and when you look at the nitrification cycle, you know, going from whatever the molecule is to an ammonium to a nitrite to a nitrate, you know, that
Mhm.
ammonium section, that ammonium step, the first one going from the molecule to NH4, is extremely volatile. And if biology isn't strong there, if there isn't enough carbon, I mean, it goes back to the carbon to nitrogen ratio. If the carbon material isn't there to feed the microbial population, we lose an ungodly amount of nitrogen in that first
Mhm.
step. I mean, that volatilization is really where most of it happens, from the breakdown of the first, you know, molecule to ammonia. I mean, is that you know, does that make sense? I mean, am I right in
Well,
thinking
it's
like
also highly energy intensive. It takes a lot of
yeah.
energy to go through those conversions. That
And
energy
and
is
and again, that's
taken
the
out of the
first
system.
conversion. So if all the energy is burned up on that first shot, then you know you don't have a lot to get into the next stop, which is getting into a nitrite and then ultimately to a nitrate. But
Well, that
um,
was one of the points these authors made, is that they truly believe they're measuring a source of nitrogen that microbes can utilize.
wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah,
That's actually very exciting. I mean, that
it
really
is. It is. This will
that
probably end
is
up
cool.
being Hopefully it's something famous someday.
Yeah, well, we'll keep, you'll keep your eye on it and you'll share it with us because I'm, and again, we haven't even shared this with the rest of our
Yeah,
agronomy team.
I'm just looking at the publication date, September of 23. So this is,
That's pretty fresh.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
fresh.
that's interesting. Yeah, I'm sure that they'll continue to do this, but yeah, anything we can do as we move down this road to quantify this whole process is going to be very, I mean, you and I have talked about this, and this goes back to what I was saying earlier. We know, I say 5%. I was corrected by you in saying 2% of the biome is actually identified. I mean, if you think about that, that means 98% of what's going on in the soil, we don't have any idea about what it is. And
Mhm.
so there's so much for us to learn. And, and I get excited about this and our team well enough that, every Monday that we sit down with you, we get excited about these things because there is so much to learn and there's so little that we really know, but we know how the process works. And we know if we feed the bugs, things are going to happen. But man, it'll be nice to have more than 98% of the biome identified, at least quantified, so that we have some ideas of what the heck's going on down there. And we're just kind of, we're playing Star Wars and letting the force be with us, we're just letting go and hoping that it all holds on. And it seems to be working. So anyway, let me finish up by asking you this question because we've run into a brick wall. It's been very frustrating, and I'll say it before you say it. You warned me, and you were right, and I was wrong, and I don't say that very often, but so we ran into a situation in our friendly state of California where they tested some of our, I think it was CalVantage. And we put in, you formulated it, so we know what goes into this. So we have a multiple form package of humates. They, go in at a rate of about 4% into the formula. So there's 4% of humate put into this formula. But when it gets tested, months down the road, we're getting test results that say there are no humates. Help me explain that because it looks like we're a bunch of lying SOBs and we're not. And we were legitimately putting these. And first of all, I'll just qualify this by saying the humates in our product are essential in just keeping our product held together. So we have to have the humate in there because, when you have 35 raw materials as opposed to normal, manufacturing might be 4 or 5 raw materials, you got to have the mechanism to keep all that mess together. But so why would it be that a state testing this material might not find what we know we put in? Stage is yours, my maestro.
Okay, to be more specific, you are talking about the California Food CDFA, the Cali Department of Food and Agriculture
Our friend.
method. And the state of California has been using this method for quite a few years. I think 1963 or something like that, or 83, some crazy amount of years, based on the assumption that they think that it quantifies how much humic acids are in a material. And it doesn't. It never has, it never will. It's called the CDFA method. They're well aware of the drawbacks of that method. It's been presented by the Humic Products Trade Association to them. I have sat down with them personally, with the head. I have sat down with the head chemist at CDFA and the department head and had discussions about how we're going to fix this problem. The answer was, if we don't do it right now, 7 years will go by before we can try to do it again.
Because it's a 7-year cycle within
Yeah.
the
And
process. Yeah.
the feeling I got from all of these meetings is, we're California. We've been doing it this way, and we're going to continue to do it that way. So you have two choices: fight them or join them.
Right. Yeah. Well, Jerry's not here to fight them, so I guess
Yeah.
we're going to have to do something.
Yeah.
So explain the chemistry though. So, and again, this was
the CDFA method that they use on your products to determine whether or not there are any humic acids in there or not has numerous flaws in it. It is a set of protocol extractions. Let's just call it that. It's a protocol of extraction steps. It's not a quantitative method of analysis. It meets no criteria of quantitative analysis. Doesn't meet it at all, especially repeatability. You know, if you send them the same sample over and over again, they're going to give you a different answer every damn time because there's so many flaws in their method. I could list them.
I see that.
We've already listed these flaws. We've already presented these flaws in there. They even heat it up too high.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So they keep referencing this Professor Hustler at somewhere in Arizona. So what I did was I called up Professor Hustler, and according to my notes, this has been a while. I thought we're beyond all this, right? According to my notes, I called him in December of 2001, I believe it was. And he's the staff chemist at Earth and Planetary Sciences University in New Mexico. And he said, they're what? I said, yeah, they're using it as an analytical method. He said, it's not an analytical method.
What are they doing that for? That's nuts.
I never developed it as an analytical method. I developed it to extract as much humic materials out of a soil sample that you could. It's supposed to be a efficient extraction technique. So it doesn't meet the standards of an analytical method. First of all, there's no standard reference material. They're calling them humic acids. So what they pull out of that method should be compared to a standard reference material. They don't do that. The materials degrade on drying. They use hydrochloric acid to acidify it to, I'm bringing this up again, the pH 1 to 2.
Yeah.
The protocol says 1 to 2. Do you realize that's one order of magnitude difference?
Yeah, a significant difference.
That's gonna, so if you're the analyst running this, you're gonna pick 1, or you're gonna pick 2, or 1.5. There is variation right there. That's not going to give you a reliable number right there. So the hydrochloric acid that they used is not washed out of the sample. That carries on over into what they call humic acids. So as a result, it overstates the content of what they're calling humic acids, and it lacks consistency among labs. It just fails any order of being a legitimate analysis. It's never been validated for the purpose because you can't. There's no way it's going to meet validation standards. So they come back and they say, you don't have any humic acids in your product. Really? Well, maybe they measured the calcium in your product. There's this thing called a lyotropic series, and it's a series of how materials, what elements bind, how strong an element binds to humic substances. It's called a lyotropic series. And when you look at the substances that bind the strongest to humic substances, it's magnesium, copper, manganese, zinc, cadmium, calcium, strontium, barium, and silver. Those bind to humic substances much, much more than most things out there. Your product called Galvantage has a very high concentration of calcium in it.
Hence the name. Yes.
Yeah, no, hence the name.
Yeah.
And, okay, that just happens to be one of the elements that binds strongly to humic acids.
So when they go
Or
in
let's
to
call it
test for
humic
the
substance.
humates, they can't find them because they're bound up.
They cannot extract it. They're chelated, they're
extract it, yeah.
complexed. They're in there. Everything about that bond is very, very strong. This has to do with like inner sphere complexes, outer sphere complexes. All this sort of thing is adding up to a material that's very, very stable. And you should say, hey, thank you, California. You just proved to me that my manufacturing process is doing what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to take those humates that we add in there. Why are they in there? They're not in there to be detected freely. They're not in there to go flying off once you put it into the soil. They're in there to stabilize that calcium. They're in there to make that calcium more bioavailable. They're in there so that when they hit the soil system, they're ready to do their job. They're not in there unbound. That's absurd to run a test that's not even validated for that purpose and tell you that you're lying. That's absurd, totally absurd.
And this is why we brought you on today, is to get your blood pressure worked up and get
I've been fighting
this.
I've been fighting this battle with California for 20 years, and they haven't budged in 20 years. So what are the chances you're going to make them budge?
But yeah, I mean, you make the point, which is really significant, is that it's proving that we know we're adding humates in there. I mean, we add a multiple layer of humates in there, and
They're in every product.
every product,
There's no exception.
yeah, and and it's when I first showed you this, and I was all pissed off and out of whack, and you said, "Oh, this is a good thing. It's showing that they're doing what we wanted them to do, which is combine
Good news.
with the cations in the product, in particular Calvantage, probably
There's only one problem with that test. It's not validated for that purpose.
right, except for it's
So it's not really.
So, I mean, our big fear, and the reason why I wanted to have you talk about this, and I knew that I would be able to get your blood pressure up. I wanted to, I mean, we sat around, Kevin Hicks and I in particular sat around and said, this is going to make, we're going to have to take humic acid off of our label. So it's going to suggest or imply that, we're not using humic acids when in fact we're using,
Told you.
Yes, he warned me on this a couple of, but
whatever you do, don't put humic acids on your label in California, because they got this absurd idea that they can test for them.
And I can only make one label for the country, so I'm going to have to take that off all the labels, and then we're going to have to come back and try to re-explain this, which is why I wanted you on and have you really explain this in some detail. And I think
this is where the Scotts of the world, right, and the Agrium of the world and the Simplots of the world go in and lobby these guys and get what they want on their label. This is exactly
they have more money than we do, don't they? They can probably get what they want.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think the point here is that if we do end up, and we will have to end up taking humic acid off of our labels, it's at least the big cations. I mean, so we had talked about this. So a product like C3, which doesn't have the heavy shot of the cation, doesn't have calcium, doesn't have added calcium, doesn't have added magnesium, doesn't have added potassium in mineral form. That material actually might test a little bit better on this procedure because it doesn't have the cations to bind up. Is that fair?
I would guess that if you had your potassium product tested, you'd probably get a humic acid number back from that CDFA method, because they don't bind as strongly as calcium. Yeah. So there might be some free humic acid in there, and then we'd say, maybe we don't need to add as much humic acid if that's the case.
Maybe they're helping us again. Yes.
Yeah.
So we're going to turn this into a positive. I mean, but I do want people to understand that, that's the point of what these are, is that they're binding to the, cations in the product to stabilize them so that they can actually work better, react better, be more available, and function better within the, in the property that, you're applying these products to. So it's very frustrating. I mean, it really is extremely frustrating as a manufacturer and somebody who's earnestly trying to do all the right things and is in fact using, and I'll say this because of you're identifying the best humates in the marketplace, and you're constantly coming to us and saying, hey, I just found something else that's even better. So we've been switching, we've been improving the humate concentrations, if you will, or the quality of the humates over the years that we've been working with you. And now we can't talk about them. So there you have it. Do all the right things and boom. Anyway, my friend, we are out of time. I'm going to, I always look forward to these conversations. I'm so glad that I was able to get your dander up. That was my goal, and you did it extremely well. So I thank you for that. And if you do see humic acid taken off of a Calvantage label, be well aware of the fact that there's plenty of humate in these products. In fact, it is exactly what we've been saying. And again, I love your optimism about the fact that it does kind of show us that, man, what we're doing is the right thing, and it's clearly working. I mean, that product, you've modified that recently to clean it up even better, because chemistry, it's been in the field for a while. It's been really cleaned up, and we were having a little issue with that. But I think the humic acids are what keeps the product clean. And you did a major overhaul last summer on that product, and since we've done that, we've really had very little crystallization in that product.
Right. We have seen a great deal of stabilization, shelf life in these products by getting the right type of humic material in there at the right conditions. Yeah, we worked real hard at this.
And now they tell us that we don't have any. So what's the
Let them
truth?
have it their
Those
way.
snake oil salesmen are at it again. That's really what it's all about. That's all they want to do is
They
sell
got to
you a
have it
jug
their
of black
way.
water. That's just a bunch of crap, as I've heard many times in my career.
Texas used to be like that until the guy who ran the department retired. I mean,
So
Texas
was
used
Kentucky. Kentucky
just
was
like,
just as bad.
yeah, California is now taking their place.
Yeah, it's funny because these are, that's supposed to be the organic state, and it's clearly not. I mean, it just, it is what it is, and I don't want to go down that road a whole
Well,
lot further.
they're
But
not applying science.
the
That's
science, yeah. So,
yeah.
Mr. Mayhew, as always, it's a great pleasure to have you on board. Like I said earlier, you've become the rock star of the EarthWorks podcast. And people love listening to you talk. So we're going to keep having you back and back and back. And if I can do anything to just get your blood pressure risen, I'm going to feel very accomplished. So once again, my friend, thank you so much. I will, we'll be in touch, obviously, on a regular basis, but I'll take the label and clean it up. So I'll call you. How's that? So thank you again.
You're welcome.
And that, my friends, is the EarthWorks podcast. We will be back next week. I think Jack Higgins might be on next week, but we'll be back next week and we'll have somebody else talking to you. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. We've done over 200 podcasts. We've got thousands of subscribers, lots and lots and lots of people listening every week. And we're very grateful for all your support. And I say thank you very much once again.